Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing a book review on The Orchard by David Hopen, or Hopen, one of the two. In this book you are following Ari Eden, who grew up Orthodox Jewish. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in the neighborhood that is known for being predominantly Orthodox Jews. He spent his whole life going to a school that emphasized studying the Torah over like education, like a public school education and things like that. So a lot of the people in his class didn't have the basic foundations of math and English and things like that you would typically think of in terms of school education, but they spent a significant amount of time studying Jewish rituals and cultures and theories and things like that. However, when he is about to enter into his senior year of high school, he finds out that his father has lost his job and that they are all moving to Florida. And they end up moving into this neighborhood that is not quite as strict as the one that he grew up in. He ends up going to another Jewish school, but this is a private school that is very competitive academically and things like that, or, pushes the limit academically and doesn't have as much of a strict line, I guess, in terms of Jewish traditions and things along those lines. So when they arrive in Florida, their neighbors across the street invite them over to a barbecue, and just basic things most of the men aren't covering their heads. There are kids in the swimming pool, the girls are wearing bikinis and are not covering themselves. The neighbor's husband goes to shake the hand of Ari's mom, and they are of the belief that you shouldn't touch someone of the opposite gender that you aren't related to, things along those lines. So you can kind of already tell that there is a cultural shift that is happening here. The neighbors across the street have a son who is also Ari's age. His name is Noah, and he's basically the most beloved kid in the neighborhood or in the town or in the school, however you want to describe it. He is a basketball star. He's very friendly. He has a girlfriend named Rebecca, and Noah basically takes Ari under his wing, and so Ari gets immediately pulled into this basically the popular group at school, and no one really can understand why or what is exactly going on, because Ari, spent the entirety of his life adhering to these strict Orthodox rules, but now he is at this school that is very, very different, filled with kids that are very, very different. Before he even starts school, he goes to a party where everyone's drinking and things along those lines, and so it's this major culture shock. And so this story takes place over the course of an entire school year, and you see how Ari and this group of friends end up testing the limits. There is Amir, who's probably the most religious, I guess, suppose you could say, out of the group of friends. He actually seems to attend temple for prayers and things along those lines and covers his head and things like that. There is Noah. There is Oliver, who is probably the least religiously strict out of the group, but his parents are extremely, extremely rich, and it is implied over and over again that basically the only reason why he hasn't gotten kicked out of the school is because his parents make significant donations to the school. And then the final one of this tight group of friends is Ethan. Everyone talks about what genius basically Ethan is. You find out that his mother has recently died, and he has basically changed significantly, and he is really turned into this dark, brooding person who is really pushing the limits. And so you just follow this group of guys along with some other classmates and things like that over the course of the school year. This is kind of a coming of age story, but there is kind of a mystery element to it. There's a prologue in here that basically lets you know that something's going to happen to this group of friends, and then it just starts, I think, in August, and every chapter, so to speak, is a different month of this school year running through until the summer. So this book, if I was going to pitch it to someone, is basically a combination of The Secret History, Dead Poets Society, and Gilmore Girls, the Yale years. The reason why I picked it up is because Liberty Hardy over at Book Riot described this as being the closest thing she has found to a secret history comp that she has ever read. I'm someone who tends to not enjoy books that get the secret history comp just because I find them to be leaning more on the pretentious side of things. And this book definitely gets pretentious, but I think it also explores some really interesting ideas. I think that if you are someone who is Jewish or is Orthodox Jew or anything along those lines, you might find this book really fascinating, because there's a significant percentage of this book that is just talking about the rituals and the prayers and sort of like the lifestyle of someone who is an Orthodox Jew that I personally found really, really fascinating. But I'm also someone who thinks like religions in general are just fascinating. And there's also a lot of like really deep philosophical discussions happening in this book, which will attract a certain type of reader and will push away a certain type of reader. So if you are someone who doesn't enjoy like philosophical musings about life and death and morality and things like that, this book is not going to be from you. This book is like chunkier. It's almost 500 pages. And the reason why it is so long is because there are like significant parts where you are following these four guys as they are going through sort of like philosophical discussions with a rabbi who is the principal at this school, things like that. So like that can very much put people off. This would definitely fall into also the dark academia sort of umbrella that I've seen get really, really popular recently. It's not as dark as some other books that I've read, but there are definitely some dark things that happen in this book. I found the story itself to be really compelling. Ari himself is a pretty interesting character just because when he arrives in Florida, he's almost like a blank slate because he hasn't experienced anything in the world. He's lived a very sheltered life and he has basically like followed the rules his entire life and he doesn't know anything else. And so it's very interesting to see sort of how he evolves over the course of the year, the choices that he makes and why he's making those choices and things along those lines. But this is also like a very, I guess, idealized world. I say idealized, but it's possible that like kids actually live this way because it's very much like an upper class world. Like the reason why I said that this book reminds me of Gilmore Girls, the Yale years, is because it's basically like a story revolving around Logan and his crew of friends. So like depending on your tolerance for those sort of like upper class stories, these kids who have significant amounts of wealth and privilege and abuse that a lot, that will definitely impact how much you enjoy this book. But I also feel like if you're someone who read a book like The Secret History, that was basically the same idea. So you'll already know whether or not you have a tolerance for these types of books. But despite the fact that this is such a long book, I honestly found it really, really compelling. Personally, I think it hit a lot of things that I really enjoy, even though it also hit things that I don't really enjoy. But I think like if I'm making the pro-con list, it definitely leans more heavily towards my personal pros. Like I said earlier, I'm someone who enjoys those sort of like learning about religions and learning about religious traditions and like why people choose certain paths or don't choose certain paths, things like that. There's a lot of like discussions in here about these kids trying to figure out if they believe in God and if they do, like what that actually means in their lives and stuff like that, and sort of the complexities of, you know, there's sort of this idea of like the Orthodox way of living a religious life of like following the rules to a very strict degree, but then you come across all these other people who consider themselves Jewish but don't have such a strict adherence, and sort of like what does that line look like for them. And obviously it's not just Jewish people who are like that. This comes into play into all religions, but kind of the discussion of those sort of things I find really fascinating. Again, if you're someone who enjoys sort of like philosophical musings of right and wrong and if God exists and morality and stuff like that, I am. So that plays very heavily in here. But it is also a coming of age story, and it is also kind of like that private school sort of idea. Like this very much is a academically focused book. So if you are someone who likes books that like take place at private schools, take place at boarding schools, even though this isn't a boarding school book, like it has similar vibes to all of those things. I would say like the main things that I didn't enjoy in this book were, one, the characterization of like the female characters in here, because the story is told only from Ari's point of view, who is this, you know, 17-year-old boy. He has a very limited view of the women in his life, and you can use that as potentially an excuse, but it just definitely feels like the women in here are just extremely underdeveloped or aren't given quite as much depth as they should have been. Sometimes it feels like they're just like tools for these guys or objects for these guys. I mean, obviously like they have some backstory, but they feel a little bit too idealized in my opinion. And then obviously there is like a significant amount of like wealth and privilege happening in this world that isn't really acknowledged. Again, all of this coming from Ari's point of view, like how much acknowledgement would there be? There's a little bit of it because there is like a slight class difference in terms of Ari and the rest of his friends, especially this specific crew of people who seem to be like the wealthiest in this school. But it isn't commented on as much as I thought it would be. And also like these kids just get away with so much BS from like their teachers and their principal and stuff like that. My tolerance for that started to wane a little bit as the book went on. I think that this book would be really fantastic to have in a book club discussion, because the things that happen in like the final couple of chapters of this book are really, really fascinating. And the unfortunate thing is that, like, obviously I'm not going to talk about them here because spoilers, but I also can see that, like, the way things go in this book may be very divisive. Like, I feel like the author chose to do certain things in this book that I haven't really seen a lot of authors attempt to do with fiction books, and especially literary fiction books. And some things are left like a little bit ambiguous, which again I can see being very divisive. But personally, I really liked it. So yeah, I found this to be like a really fascinating read. I read this basically entirely over the course of a Saturday. Once I started it, I immediately got sucked in and wanted to like find out what was happening. So I basically read this whole thing in one day, despite the fact that it is quite the chunker. So I think that says a lot to the writing style and the characters in here and things like that. But again, it hits a lot of the things that I really enjoy in literary fiction books. It has a good balance of plot, and I think the fact that it's set over the course of someone's senior year of high school makes it very easy to feel like you're constantly moving, as opposed to maybe some other literary fiction books that can feel kind of plotless or like they're meandering. But it also has significant amounts of like character development and reflection and things along those lines. And these are like kids who are very, very thoughtful. I could also see like some people saying that these are unrealistic kids, which I would definitely understand that argument, but I feel like you are told from the beginning that these are kids who are like extraordinary. Like, these are kids who like quote Shakespeare off the top of their heads and things along those lines. So like, these are not typical kids. And so to me, like, those sort of characterizations don't bother me as much once that's sort of made it clear. So yeah, I think I would give this book like a 4 out of 5 stars. Like, I was very close to giving it a 5-star rating, but there's just like certain things that got under my skin a little bit. But this is definitely a really, really good book that I don't think a lot of people have on their radar that should have it on their radar. So those are my quick thoughts on The Orchard by David Hopen. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read this book, what your thoughts were on it, or if you have any questions about the book, feel free to leave that down in the comment section below. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.